Good afternoon. It's great to be with you today. I'm Ben Cassidy, talking on behalf of Fly on the Wall Press, which I know you've worked with Isabel recently. How are you doing today?
Hi, Ben. Nice to meet you as well. I'm doing great. Yeah.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do today is a bit of an interview between Benjamin Cassidy and Erik Fuhrer, and I'm really excited to talk about Erik's new book, which has come out with Vegetarian Alcoholic Press, something a bit different, feels dystopian, which is apt for our current times. Just wanted to introduce our interviewer and interviewee before we start. So Benjamin Francis Cassidy, he was born in Blackpool in 1982, which is in UK, by the way, because we've got an international interview here. He lives in Manchester at the moment with his cat Lucy, where he gained his degree from Manchester Metropolitan University in 2018 in English and creative writing. His non-fiction work includes publishing by Louder Than War, Sci-Fi Pulse, Mad Hatter Press, and Fly on the Wall Press blog. He appears in 2 writer anthologies by Comma Press, and Ben writes poetry too. All his work attempts to interpret what he feels is a very strange world. And then our interviewee is Erik Fuhrer, and he has a Twitter handle, Erik Fuhrer, so you can find him quite easily. He's a poet, artist, collaborator, and educator. And with his wife, the painter Kimberly Lodgewitz, he is a co-collaborator of Not Human Enough for the Census, which is his collection with Vegetarian Alcoholic Press, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, and about the writing process. And also books include And in Which I Take Myself Hostage by Putin DeVille Press, which is forthcoming this year. So his work has also been a finalist for Sir Vision's inaugural James Tate Chapbook Prize and has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, Best Microfictions and Best of the Net. And Erik gained his MFA from the University of Notre Dame. He's currently an editorial assistant for International Studies and Literature and the Environment, and a reader for Pigeonholes. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I will hand over to Ben.
Wonderful. First off, Erik, I was just wondering which way round things happened with this collaboration with your partner. Did you respond to Kimberly's artwork, or was it more a case of her responding to your writing, or perhaps a mixture?
It was a little bit of a mixture, and I was always really inspired by this one painting that she had that was an encaustic painting. It's basically done with beeswax. And I'd never seen anything, I haven't seen that type of painting before, and I was really just kind of in love with it. And that something was always in my mind, and I realized it was kind of like pulsing in my mind as I created this collection. And so I guess I wasn't deliberately responding to it, but as I was writing it, I was thinking of it, and afterwards I realized how important it was to me kind of working through a lot of my writing for this collection. So I was the one who approached her and said, I think since this painting was in my mind, I think it'd be really cool if maybe we could have more of your paintings, put this painting in the book, and then have some more of your paintings in here. So then what she did is she went through each section, and she created a new painting for each section of my book, but it was all a variation of that original painting. So my first section of the book is that painting is along with it. And then each following section, she went into Photoshop and kind of changed it a bit so that it would reflect that particular section of the book. So it's almost like that painting that kind of was in my head the entire time. And I felt like when I looked back, or when I kind of stepped back, that I was collaborating with became kind of the centerpiece that then kind of moved along with my work. So she was more deliberately responding to my work. I was just always kind of living with it, with her work.
That's brilliant. That's really interesting to hear. Thank you so much for that, Erik. I think you touched there on my second question was about what inspired you to write this, and you've sort of touched on that a little bit. I'd like to explore, or ask you to explore, or tell us a bit more about the epigraph at the start of the book, which reads, "We are humus, not homo, not anthropos. We are compost, not post-human." That book by Donna Haraway, "Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Cthulhu."
So Donna Haraway is always, I would say for the past 10 years or so, someone that has really stuck with me because of her books, for one, are always really weird. Like, they start out with as theory, and then they move into email exchanges, and they move into personal history, and then they move back into theory. And I really like how her books are so expansive. And that's something I always was really inspired by. And I think I don't do it in the same way in my book, but I try to not have it be, I try to experiment with different ways of looking at the subject that I'm looking at, if that makes any sense. But the idea that we are not, that humans are not exceptional, or humans are part of this kind of, as she said, we're a compost, right? We're all part of this world with other creatures, with other non-humans, and we're all kind of moving in it together. And in her previous book, she called it queer messmates, that, where humans always have, our cells are only partially human. The rest is all these different like microbes and stuff that are on us, right? So we're not all fully human. And it was always a really cool idea to me. And then also just as a scientific fact, which is also really cool. I never really knew that until I encountered her book. And that really influenced the kind of murkiness of the kind of characters in my book, or the murkiness of boundaries, in the murkiness or the fluidness of boundaries within non-human enough for the census.
That's fascinating, Erik. Thank you so much. I did read your poetry before this interview, and I did struggle with it a little bit, and that's part of the reason I wanted to ask that question. I fully agree with you, and I like what you said about a book being reassuringly expensive to steal. A strapline made famous by a beer, actually, Stella Artois. But I think that expense comes from it being such a narrow field of study, and knowing what interests you will help me to reread the stuff with a little bit more nuance and a little bit of background, I think, and a bit of context as well. I can now see why, or start to see why, maybe Yobi took those forms, and it's really trying to deal with not only complex ideas but really narrow ideas as well, that perhaps there aren't. It seems to be perhaps a new and emerging field of academia, perhaps, or something. Also, I was also wondering, this is a really broad question, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but what other types of poetry do you like, or novels, or literature? You've spoken to us about Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Cthulhu Scene, but I wondered if there's any other standout poets, either now or of the past, or books, or general genres that interest you.
Yeah, I think one person that comes to mind is Nathaniel Mackey, is someone I really like, and someone who kind of builds these kind of worlds in his book, and they're very musical. I really like Douglas Kearney. I really like the way he his work on the page. He deals with typography a lot, so it's almost like art plus writing, which is really cool. And I always, whenever I read his work, I always think, how in the world would you ever read this out? Because some of it is just words on top of words going like this way. And I've seen him read it out, and since then I still ask that question, because it's just it seems like you have to be him to know how to read it out, because it's just so complex, the typography on the page, and he kind of really performs it and kind of has different registers as he performs it. So I think his work is super cool, and I always think when I'm reading books, like, how is this meant to be performed or read out? And I'm still thinking about that in my own poetry, because I feel like I should be doing something more than just reading it out, because it's like different voices and stuff, but I don't just want to make different voices. So I'm not sure, but his work inspires me to think through that. I really love a poetry recently that I have read multiple times is Salman Sharif's Look, which has been wonderful. I've taught Patricia Smith's Blood Dazzler multiple times, and that always has taught really well, and it's a really beautiful and haunting book. So I think those are the people that have been kind of spinning around my mind most often. There's certainly a lot of people I'm forgetting right now, but those are people that that I can currently, that maybe are most important to me at the moment.
Again, thank you so much for that, Erik. It really sort of provides a closer reading of your work, I think, and puts it into more context. I think typography and the layout of things on the page, it's almost like it seems something brand new to us, but a book that springs to mind on top of my head is Alice in Wonderland, for example. There are words that sort of go all the way down the page, and so it's nice to see in 2020 that being further explored, being more of an exploration of it and an expansion, as opposed to sort of the view that it's never been done before. Obviously, it's never been done how you've done it, because you're which is great. But I think it's exciting and interesting to explore what the page is, really, and allow readers a bit more scope than the vast majority of books out there. I was also interested in what artists do either you or do you know that Kimberly is particularly fond of, or are there any specific paintings?
Yeah, so I know Kim loves Joan Mitchell, and I know she's been super important to her. And she loves the abstract expressionists, but she loves the ones that are more, that don't really replicate form. So she likes painting, prefers abstract expressionist paintings that, would not be like, this is a cow, but kind of abstract cow. But she likes it more like, what is that? Like it's so abstract that it no longer quite looks like what it was. And I think that's what she's more drawn to. And Joan Mitchell's landscapes definitely are not representational at all. They're just very expansive in their color and their kind of shape. That's something I know that's really important to her. And again, just like color, I think is super important, and texture I know is very important to her as well, which is why she loved working with the encaustic paintings and the beeswax, because you can get this really cool like layers from it. You could just layer the beeswax on top of the beeswax, and it just gets this like really kind of gnarly texture to it, and it's just really something you can't do with other paints quite as easily.
Wow, I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea to, as you say, not just make something more than a book, actually try to put physical attributes of nature onto something. Question I've been dying to ask, looking at how your work's laid out on the page and how specific the ideas are, is if you don't mind talking to us a little bit about the editing process, how you got it from idea to the page, and were there any bones of contention or things that you really had to dig your heels in and fight to keep that an editor might have misunderstood or not fully gained the significance of from your perspective?
I want to say first, Ben, that I never thought of the fact that the work that she did is made by beeswax, which is made by bees, and that kind of filters through my work as well, because it's about the natural world. So thank you for that. I've never actually put that together, but that's a really great insight that I haven't thought about that makes collaboration even larger. So the editing process, I kind of just write quite a lot. And I don't do much editing while I'm writing. I just kind of write. And these actually started off, most of the work, at least like the first section of poems is like, I think maybe like 10 pages long. And they used to all be these really dense prose pieces that were really hard to read because they were just what you're seeing in the book, but just with no breaks and then other words in them. So they were hard to read. And it was kind of cutting down from there. And I originally had, it sounds weird because it doesn't really make any sense when I think about it, but Jack Nicholson and Anthony Hopkins were actually characters in the poems in the beginning. And I was with my MFA thesis advisor, and he was just like, he's like, what are they doing in here? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And he told me to cut them. And it took me a little bit to like let go. But I think once I let go, I realized that he was right, you know, because I kept it just in case I wanted to put them back in. But I realized, yeah, this is working so much more smoothly without, it just felt, I already have a lot of ideas buzzing around in the, so to add Anthony Hopkins and Jack Nicholson into that was a little bit too much of a cocktail. So I think that was a good choice. So the editing kind of happened before that major editing, because it was cutting out, I would say, half of what the poems were. So that major editing really helped. And then when I sent it out to presses, it was pretty smooth from that. But I think that part needed to happen. And I think if it didn't happen, the process part wouldn't have been as smooth because it was just too busy.
Well, I mean, first I'd like to say is getting the product out of your brain and onto the page and then into a book and out into the world. I think that's something that every single writer struggles with, whether it's the first book, whether it's the 55th book. It doesn't matter. I think maybe from what I've heard of people, that sort of process gets harder. And do you perform your poems online, or if you have done that, or at events before the lockdown in coffee shops or bars, how have they been received?
I don't very often, and I'd like to try more, but I did read at a coffee shop in December. I think it was the only reading I've done from this book, and it went okay. I still think I need to think about how I'm going to read these poems, because I just kind of read them like da, 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 you know, like I'm talking right now, and I feel like there needs to be, I'm interested in like sound work or something. You know, I have a friend, Madison MacArthur, who does these works and does kind of like sound work and has like sound behind him, and it's just really great. So I would really like to think about kind of just thinking about moving it beyond like just a traditional like reading out. But right now I just don't know how to do that. But it's something I kind of want to think about. Like I said with Douglas Kearney, when I saw him read, you know, he was walking, you know, he was walking around, he was singing, he was, you know, he was doing some gestures gestures, and it was a performance. And I feel like that's what I would like to kind of do, but I also feel kind of like I don't really want to do that at the same time. So I got to kind of figure that out.
So, a really interesting discussion. I wrote down that it was interesting that humans, you were saying, Erik, are not exceptional. We constantly have things living on our skin and our eyelashes and our hair, I think. That might just be myths, but I know that we do have things living in our face and in our eyelashes, especially. So yeah, the boundaries between, are we human, what lives on us, what part of the ecosystem are we, and actually how small are we within that. And very interesting discussion about how you perform your work. Recently, I saw people perform where they divided it into voices, and they had their two daughters who were identical be the aliens in their poem, which was a gorgeous way of performing it. And very interesting discussion about how art can interact with the natural world. We were talking about beeswax and the texture, and I was wondering, just as a final sort of closing question, any art in the book is actually 3D in texture, but just it doesn't perhaps show on the page.
The first image that shows up in the inside of the book, that texture is not really represented on the page, because that is lifted a bit. It's not super lifted, because certainly she has other paintings with the encaustics that have a lot more built texture, but it is you definitely are not getting that from the page. So that's something that's definitely, whereas the other ones are all Photoshop renditions of that painting. So they're more flat. But yeah, that one you're losing a little bit of the dimension.
Yeah. That's interesting that, in a way, some of them have been hand created for the book. So no meaning is sort of lost because they've been created for that purpose. Thank you so much for interviewing today, Ben, and for talking to us, Erik. Hope everyone goes and checks out Not Human Enough for the Census, which is with Vegetarian Alcoholic Press. Really interesting collection to continue this discussion that we've been talking about. So thank you both for your time.
Thank you, Ismail.